Hello and welcome to Interchange. I'm Joanne Williams, sitting in for Dan Jones. It's been a week filled with change and violence, from the bombings in the Boston Marathon to a new pathway to citizenship for people who want to live and work in the United States, to potentially reshaping our local government. We could talk about each of these topics for an entire half hour. But first, here are our panelists. We have longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally with us, Gerard Randall, education consultant and job creation expert, Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional, and Kevin Fischer, a former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and frequent fill-in host for News Talk 1130 WISN. Rick Horowitz will also be along with commentary at the end of the show. Let's begin with the news that's been changing by the minute. 2 suspects in the Boston Marathon bombing were found. One was killed in a shootout with police, the other escaped. With one of the suspects on the loose, law enforcement took the unprecedented move of ordering all residents of Boston and many suburbs to stay in their homes, to shelter in place. One of the biggest players in this extraordinary series of events has been the media, following developments, sometimes getting things wrong, and being used by police to get messages to the public. Is this the right use of the media in all of its forms? And should we be skeptical about it? What do you think? Kevin. They're laughing at me.
He's Joel. I'm Kevin. I can't believe that people would confuse us.
Me either.
But there's a honeymoon period with a new host.
I guess.
And it's still underway. Okay.
Well, you're taller than he is, so go for it.
There's good and there's bad. There's this complex relationship between law enforcement and the news media, which we saw in this bombing. In one instance, here's law enforcement, rightfully so, upset at the misinformation, at the wrong information that's going out that could hinder their investigation. And then moments later, here they are working hand in hand in conjunction with the media to get important information, i.e. footage, videos, photos that we all have now and will probably lead to the capture of the second suspect. But I think we've seen a real dramatic change in the world of journalism, and we have seasoned veterans here on this panel, I think, that would agree with me that the change has not been for the good. In the old days, when you saw mistakes happen, there was an act of contrition, there was a sincere, deep, honest, authentic apology, and maybe some heads would roll. Now, there's none of that. In this race to be first, and mind you, there is a race to be first, and anybody that denies that is not being truthful. In the race to be first, if you are wrong, well, there's no, I'm sorry, I messed up, my career, my job is on the line, and because there's no price to pay, there's nothing to learn, there's nothing to benefit from, and journalists just go about their merry way and maybe repeat these same mistakes because there were no repercussions.
Now, we've always wanted to be first, but I always wanted to be right.
Yeah, and the problem was when this first broke, I tried to find out immediately on the web what the heck was going on, and I can't tell you how many wrong things I saw. You know, about dozens being killed and the numbers of injuries changing all the time, and then there was this spectacular thing just on Thursday when CNN went for a long time on the arrest of some dark-skinned gentleman or something, and before admitting that it was wrong. And even though we get more information on these 24-hour news channels and all that than we've ever had before, so much of it is wrong. Many of us know that we don't watch Fox News for facts, so that rules out one of them. But then if you can't trust CNN either, and they take a while, when I tuned in today to try to find out what was going on, ordinarily I would tune into CNN, because that's where I get most of the straight news that I get on television, but I didn't know if I could believe anything on there today.
Well, and that particular journalist on CNN has a history of making mistakes.
Well, he's talking about
the problem is that in situations like this, not only does everyone want to be first, we all get that, we all understand that. These mistakes that are made, the misinformation that is shared, has this way of suddenly becoming fact.
Yeah.
Because people say it. as if it's fact.
And then you see it on the web besides.
Exactly. So, I mean, what really happens is instead of in this rush to be first, this rush to get some information on, is people try to fill these gaping holes that exist in 24-hour news. I mean, you've got to figure out what you're going to fill. There's such a rush to be able to say something, to do something, to have some live shot, that it's almost in some ways about the production of the news event and the newscast than it is about the facts. And it makes it, I think, actually much harder for the average citizen whose airways, you know, the media are using.
These are public airways.
Right, to be able to figure out what has actually happened. Well, and it also, for those of us who have relatives in that area, it becomes a real case of, you know, should I be concerned? How concerned should I be? And then by the time you pick up the phone to dial, it's like, oh, never mind.
Gerard, I don't know if you've been watching it as closely as some of us who watch news a lot, but what did you think when you started to hear about this? Did you think we were getting too much information, too little information?
No, primarily because the way that I get my information is not just by television news. I utilize web sources, as many of you do.
That's a scary thing.
Well, yeah, especially for me. And so it wasn't so much my looking at it as a rush to be first as news outlets rushing to be relevant. Look at the scope of what happened today in Boston, where they literally shut down the whole city. They asked people to stay indoors. They shut down public transportation.
Unprecedented.
It is. It's unprecedented for an American city of that size, when a corresponding tragedy of that size had not occurred. They were out looking for two people, basically, and they virtually shut down the whole city. And that required the support of the media in order to get that done. And I think the zeal that many in the news media had to be helpful led to a lot of the misinformation that occurred as a result.
Here's the problem, and invariably this is what will happen. There will be another breaking news story. Right. There will be another breaking news story of this magnitude. And that will, unfortunately, wipe out the memory of the errors and mistakes of this one, leading to possibly more errors and an industry that will not have learned from the mistakes it made.
There was an uglier side to this
take
too.
on that one too, in that, and this isn't brand new. A lot of the things that people know this right now about Columbine High School are not true. They are the things that were initially reported about, you know, these kids were loners and they were, you know, wearing these strange, you know, trench coats that made them different from everybody. These were some of the most popular kids in that school. But most people thinking back remember that loner stuff and the bullying by jocks stuff, which didn't happen. You know, there have been some very good studies on, you know, people who really gone into that, and what most people believe happened were some of the things initially reported, not what the facts later came out to be.
And I think that's the problem, because you have these events that happen, this desire from the public, rightfully so, to want to know what happened, who was involved, and the underlying theme in all of this is, am I safe? Are people I know and care about safe? So in this rush to fill oftentimes with information that's not correct, this time with lots of information, it's repeated over again, over again, and over again. And then what happens? When there's resolution to the case, the coverage drops off. So the amount of time when the correct information was actually shared is so much smaller than the amount of time when the incorrect information
Whatever happened to, there was a bombing, people got hurt, people got killed, this is horrible, the authorities are investigating. No,
not enough.
That's out the window now.
You know what happened? Social media happened.
Right.
The mainstream media and the larger media cannot compete now with social media because everybody is reporting something and it's instantaneous.
So to be relevant, the main media today focused on the gunfight that took place last night. They were waiting, lurking, literally, for some gunfight to take place or some bombing to take place in the course of the capture of the second suspected gunman, bomber. And all of that, to me, was the unseemly side, the more salacious coverage that really makes you have a lack of credibility if you're in the media.
Let me add one more thing, because this
Very
kind of
briefly,
this,
because we want to have another big subject
but
to
the fact
discuss.
that today we actually knew who those two suspects were
Right.
is amazing, and that's part of social media too, because it had to do with pictures being taken at the time,
Right.
film being taken at the time, and it also had to do with something I've always hated. All these public
cameras.
video cameras.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't like the idea that American people are under surveillance all the time, whether they're guilty of anything or not.
You might see
But
more
I-
of that
but I-
as a
but I
result
was
of
sure,
Right.
But I was sure glad that we had those pictures.
Yep, and they were
Well,
good pictures.
As we said, we could talk about this subject for the entire half hour, but we have a couple of others we'd like to talk to you about that have happened during this week. The new immigration reform plan. It was crafted by the nicknamed Gang of Eight, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans in the Senate. They announced a new pathway to citizenship to solve the illegal immigration question. The bill is 1,500 pages long, and for someone waiting to become a citizen of the United States, that bill could make that happen. But it could also take 10 to 13 years. Have we found the solutions? Denise, what do you think?
Well, I don't know that we found the solutions, but hope, there's a sense of hope around the fact that we found a place to be able to start. And the reason the bill's 1,500 pages long is because this is a really complex subject. Not only is it complex, there has to be a way within this bill, because it is a compromise, to give people something of what they wanted, not everything of what they wanted. But I do think, and I don't know how in this country, with a number of folks who are here illegally, I don't know how we go through the process of really addressing this problem if there is not some path to citizenship. I mean, there absolutely has to be. Now, we can decide whether or not that needs to be 13 years away from now, or if it's a process that happens much more quickly. But I don't think, and I think this is particularly true when you take a look at, traditionally, at those southwestern border states, Texas, New Mexico, California, Arizona, where there has been this fervor to somehow do something about immigration for a long period of time. But now what we're seeing is that this is an issue that's also happening here in the heartland. How do we address these issues? I don't think as a country we can take a look at the resource that several million people bring in terms of economic development and say, we're going to wait 13 years to figure this out.
We know why there's a sense of hope right now, though.
Why is that?
And that's because Republicans have decided they can't continue, perpetrating hatred against Latino immigrants. They got so wiped out in the 2012 elections that we do have in this Gang of Eight. Half of them are Republicans, and there's still a group in the Republican Party who are attacking their Republican members for supporting immigration rights and a pathway to citizenship. The idea that it might take 10 or 13 years, and I suppose in order to pacify the extreme right, we have to draw it out. But the truth of the matter is, Jim Sensenbrenner in this community tried to criminalize 11 to 12 to 13 million people who are in this country illegally. It's never been a criminal charge. It's always been a civil charge, and you can be deported. But he wanted to actually make it possible to put all those people in prison. And it passed the House of Representatives under a Republican majority.
Well, let me ask the gentleman over here. Under this new proposal, people would sort of have to stand in line. Not realistically, probably realistically too. But should the people who are coming in as people who want to have citizenship be in a different line than the people who have already been here for 20 years working and bringing up their families?
Not if they got here illegally.
Well,
if they came here illegally, there should be a following of the process that would legitimize those who would follow the process, the standard process. I'm not saying that there ought not be a path to citizenship, and I think this group of senators that have tried to mollify the two camps, the one camp that says you have to have a way of ensuring the borders are secure, and the other camp that says you need to have an automatic fast path to citizenship.
13 years is a path.
Well, 13 years may not be a fast track, but certainly it's a track, and it's a starting point for a conversation that I think will lead to some level of decrease in the amount of time that it's going to take for people to get here. But clearly, if you come into the country and you're following all of the current legal processes to get here, you've done all of the right things. And there's, I think, a resentment that people have that those who came illegally jump in front of them, get a fast track way to get in. I don't think that will be helpful either.
Kevin, you're nodding. Do you agree with Gerard?
I agree. I have not as much hope as some on this panel. In fact, I have some doubts. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages, right? They were released Wednesday. We had the first hearing on it in the Senate today. We have another one scheduled on Monday. There is no way on God's green earth that any of those senators on the committee or their able-bodied staff can digest hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. I don't see, and that's the way we do things in Washington now. These big, comprehensive, mega reform measures that are supposed to address one problem, but what they do is create different, and I would submit even larger problems. This particular bill has 400 waivers and exemptions. That's problematic. I think the better approach is the one that's being done in the House, where you take all of the individual elements involved in this issue, all right? The skilled immigrant labor, the unskilled immigrant labor, securing the borders, and you put them into smaller bills and attack those issues systematically and specifically. I think that's the way to go.
That's not comprehensive immigration reform.
Then maybe
and I think that's really what we need to have.
May not be any reform.
It's not the way to go, especially when you have the situation, right. that whole thing where, hey, I came here legally,
right.
I went through the process, I did all the homework, I did all the research, I did what I was supposed to do, and now you're going to let somebody who was here illegally jump ahead of me?
The thing is, we've created this issue for ourselves. I'm not going to call it a problem. I'm going to say we've created this issue ourselves. Because what has happened is we have employers who have turned their eyes and turned their heads and turned their backs when they know full well that they are hiring people who are undocumented. So what does that do? That encourages more people to follow that same path to be able to earn enough money to support themselves and support their families.
I would strengthen those penalties against those employers that do
what
hire
happens in this case, though, when it comes to people who are undocumented, is that the people who bear the burden of that are not the employers, it's the undocumented workers.
And their children who are brought here as babies and young children. Some of them
illegally.
don't
illegally.
They don't understand You don't understand the concept of illegal.
This. You know, what is illegal about a baby being brought here? What has that baby done? Well, the best sign I ever saw on an immigration march said no human being is illegal. The fact that you're calling these people those names does not mean these aren't good people who are in this, who have in fact didn't know until they graduated with honors from high school.
The fact of the matter is there's a process for entering into this country. And they didn't follow the process.
And we have selectively,
was written by the legislature.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's leave it here for this week because we can bring it up and talk about it again.
See what you started, Joanne.
See what I started. Well, let's bring this back to a local issue, something else that you probably have heard about. It's called the incredible shrinking Milwaukee County Board. State Representative Joe Sanfilippo introduced legislation in Madison to reduce the size of the salaries of the board. Then some county supervisors went on the offensive and offered their own plan for change. This all sounds like it's going to work, or maybe not. What do you think, Gerard?
I think it was a power grab from the very beginning. It was ill-advised. It's been poorly thought out. It has race overtones to it. I'm highly suspicious of the plan that was proposed by Sanfilippo. I do think, though, what it's done is it's pushed the county board to examine its own policies and its staffing levels and the amount of money that it takes to do a competent job and the number of people that it would take to perform a good review of the legislation that needs to come forward and the oversight of the county executive's administration. That being said, it's sad that the board could surface what I think is a far more thoughtful plan, and the county executive would offhandedly dismiss it because it doesn't give him as much power as the piece of legislation proposed by Sanfilippo does.
Well, I'm glad you were very generous and gentle on your comments there. What do you think? What do you think, Joel?
Well,
Should we shrink the county board?
I don't think it's a big deal whether we shrink the county board or not. Sanfilippo certainly didn't propose shrinking it when he was on it or cutting his salary in half. But now that he's no longer on it, and he never made much, never contributed much when he was, but now that he's in the legislature, he thinks outside bodies should come in and take away our representative government at the county level. The truth of the matter is, the last two problems out of county government have been the last two county executives. Scott Walker before he was elected governor, who brought this county to the brink of bankruptcy, and before that, Tom Ament, who passed this scandal that presumably brought Walker into office in order to fix everything, except he left it worse than it was before. Gerard is right. There's more and stronger black representation on the county board than any other legislative body in this state. And the fact that this is being proposed by not the community, but the Greater Milwaukee Committee, all white CEOs of the most powerful businesses, and a millionaire county executive who I actually kind of support. I actually think he was right to merge services, city and county policing, that kind of thing. And the county board blocked that. But he's wrong to say, okay, wipe out the check on the county executive because they wouldn't go along with what I proposed.
But is this all just inside baseball? Do the voters and the citizens of Milwaukee County really care?
Well, yes, I think what people care about is having elected representation. And I agree that this is, whether you want to call it a power grab or just misplaced, this is the kind of decision that rests with the citizens of Milwaukee County. It does not reside in Dane County. So I think that if this is something that needs to be done, as the current county board is doing, let it propose that, let those decisions be made at the local level.
They've had that opportunity.
Let me finish. I wasn't
We only
finished.
have about 30 seconds.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. I know you can do a lot in about 25. It really is important. What really is important is to realize that citizens have the right and the opportunity to elect and select their own government. And that cannot be superseded by a group of legislators or other folks who decide they know better.
Well, let's let
It's the epitome of local control by putting this on a local referendum.
After they've already made the changes.
You're not taking away their power. You still will have a county board. It's just that they will not be full-time and they won't be paid as much. And yes, people care. People in 12 Milwaukee County municipalities voted overwhelmingly that these positions should be part-time. And my friend and county supervisor gets it, Mark Borkowski, who says, if this goes to referendum, we're toast. It'll be approved 80-20, and you know what? Things will be just fine.
That's not all the legislation says.
It's not. The legislation is much more prescriptive about what the county board is actually able to do. It's not as simple as saying you're going to get less money and there are going to be fewer of you. It changes the balance of power, and that is something that's huge. The easy thing to pick off is talking about, well, we're going to have fewer county supervisors, they're going to be paid less. That's the easy piece. As is always the case, when you peel back the onion, that's where you see the root of what's happening. And this is certainly the case here. This is about a change in the balance of power. Make no mistake about it. It is not simple.
As I said at the beginning, 3 subjects that we could talk about for half an hour, but we don't have that much time. But we do want to bring you this. To end our conversations, it's not unusual for one big story to crowd out other important stories. Rick Horowitz knows that too, and he's trying to keep an eye on both Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. Rick?
I want to say this very carefully. I'm not in any way dismissing or diminishing what's been happening in Boston, which is huge, horrifying. I went to school near Boston. I still have friends up there. I know people who've run in Boston, but the numbers are what the numbers are. As of Friday afternoon, there have been 3 people killed by the twin explosions at the marathon. There are dozens of people killed by guns in this country every week. And the United States Senate, with a chance to do something about that second number, that much bigger number, couldn't get it done. The killing machine industry stopped it. You can call them the National Rifle Association if you want to, but what they are is the trade association for the killing machine industry. They stopped it, along with their Senate accomplices. A minority of the Senate, let's be clear about that, but enough to stop even the smallest progress improving background checks, let alone putting limits on assault weapons or high-capacity magazines. So we're clear about that. What we're not clear about is which of those senators actually believed the propaganda the NRA was handing them. National gun registries, the first step on the path toward confiscation. And which of them knew better but echoed the talking points anyway because they were scared to stand up to the gun lobby. Which is to say, were they clueless or gutless? Was saving their own jobs more important than saving other people's lives? Amazing, really. I guess in the end, meeting all those grieving parents didn't matter, or looking Gabby Giffords in the eye. I mean, hey, she wasn't a senator, right? She only worked on the other side of the building. She's not one of us. Is that what it takes? Are we all playing by Portman rules now? You know Rob Portman, don't you? Republican senator from Ohio. He used to be against same-sex marriage. A couple of weeks ago, he changed his position. Now he's okay with it. And what was the new argument, the new statistic that changed his mind? No new statistic. He found out his son is gay. So now it's all different because now it's personal. Now it hits home. Nice. Is that the only way to change congressional minds about guns, about gun violence? God save us if it is.
Thanks, Rick. And thank you all for the lively discussion. And thank you for joining us. Now, interCHANGE will not be on the air for the next 2 weeks because of the great TV auction. We want you to watch that. We invite you, though, to join us again on Friday, May 10th. Until then, learn something new.